Hello, everyone. Excited to be in London with you guys this week. We're going to spend a couple of minutes, as Jason just mentioned, talking through a lot of the questions and common topics that you guys all submitted to the pre-survey and some of the forum responses that we've had there. We're going to dive into a couple of introductions here to start, then I'll walk us through the agenda. And we'll go from there. But first, quick background on myself. So I'm the head of talent for A16Z Crypto. Prior to here, I actually spent some time at Uber in Cloud Kitchens and Meta, building out their engineering organizations on the talent side. I'll pass over to Mehdi now.
Hey everyone, glad to be here in London. I'm Mehdi. I head up executive talent here for A16Z Crypto. Been here for a little over a year and a half now. Prior to this, I was at Chainlink Labs leading talent globally. And before that, I got my intro into Web3 at Meta. Got the honor to lead recruiting over there globally for the NoVDM Libra project. And Madan.
All right. Hi, Madan. Call me Madan. Madan. Both are good. I lead the people practices side of A16Z Crypto, which basically means after anything outside of hiring, from compensation, culture, performance management, immigration, anything to do with people practices, the buck stops with me. I'm really excited to be in this role. I get to meet with most founders almost pretty regularly. Prior to that, I spent about 3+ years with Paxos in a regulated blockchain kind of stablecoin space, which is heating up right now. Very interesting. And then prior to that, I cut my teeth in a couple of internet companies, Amazon and Meta, when they were pretty small. Helped them scale to where they are right now. I live in New York. I'm very excited to be here. And I have a connection to London. I studied here 20 years ago, so I'm dating myself, but this is very special.
Awesome. Thank you, Madan. All right, cool. So a quick look at the agenda for today. We're actually going to start with a couple of slides from Madan on compensation strategy and some of the principles you guys should be thinking about at this early stage. Again, lots of questions on this from the survey, so figured it made sense to start the discussion with that. We're then going to transition into a quick fireside chat between the three of us, again, touching on a lot of the questions and topics that you guys had submitted coming into this week. We'll then break after the fireside chat, come back for a quick workshop on talent branding, careers pages, and then again, a quick workshop session on that. Some of you already know this, but we're going to be posting a blog, publishing some of the open roles and highlighting all the companies in this room at the end of the program. So part of what we'll be doing in the workshop today is for that piece. So again, more to come on that once we get there. But that said, without further ado, Madan's going to take the stage to walk us through compensation strategy. And again, Mehdi and I will be back shortly after that.
Thank you, everyone. I get a really good ringside view of working with founders on a daily basis. And one of the common patterns that I've noticed are the fact that you're going to be playing two roles pretty much from day one, right? There is a role of the founder, technical, CEO, CTO, I need to get product market fit kind of role. And you're also the head of people pretty much from the day you decide to sign up for this crazy journey, starting with hiring your co-founder or your founding set of employees, et cetera, to answering questions on how should I pay, how much should I pay, how much equity should I pay, what levers do I have on compensation, is this the right comp, is this the right data set? Okay, this person kind of leaving this company and coming in here, should I throw in more percentage of equity? I'm thinking of tokens. How do I mix tokens and equity? Someone told me bonuses make no difference. Should I add them or not? Someone's now asking me for what's my employee equity pool. Someone says 7%, someone pays 10%. So you get a lot of these questions pretty much from day one. And whether you like it or not, you're playing the head of people role pretty quickly. The sooner you kind of standardize answers in your own head to these questions, the faster you can build a world-class company. Because these questions are going to be with you whether you are a 2-people company or a 200-people company. They're pretty much constant. You're hiring, you're letting people go, you're performance managing, you're promoting, you're giving people equity, refreshers, et cetera. And most of those decisions are the tone for those decisions you're going to be setting. So if you look at the way, as a founder, what you should pretty much think about doing is you should try to see if you can systematize your core compensation system, which basically means that you have a set of principles that can guide you. And then those principles turn into a system that eventually can continuously be repeated, which means the following, that you need to commit to a culture of feedback. If there's one thing that I want you to take away from this presentation, is committing to a culture of feedback in your company, because once you commit to a culture of feedback, you potentially get a great system. From that system, you get repeatability, and from that repeatability, you get great culture. So that's the first thing, saying, okay, if I were to think about compensation strategy excellence, I really need to think about systematizing the way I kind of run this. So think of your compensation system just like any software system, and think of making that like repeatable. And that's when you're like, okay, what principles of compensation do I need to focus on? So what I'm going to walk you through in the next 7 minutes are pretty much, as you see on the slide, how to think about compensation principles. Is there a scientific way for me to kind of think about everything from base and bonus, token and equity, refreshers, performance, feedback, ratings, distribution, all of those things that you're going to be kind of hit with pretty quickly. Once I understand the core set of principles, what data set do I need to kind of use? Where can I find that data to make really good compensation decisions as founders every single day, right? And then what total compensation model do I then say, this is how the comp strategy at my company is going to work? Once you get that done, the three things on the bottom is what you are going to be faced with in terms of decisioning every single day. You then get to make great offers, consistent offers, fair offers. You then get to attract great talent, right? Then you get a good sense of how to think about ongoing grants, promotion grants, refresher grants, all of the things that come to you once you have employees hitting their 1 year and 2 year mark. And then eventually, when you started this company, I'm sure every one of you will raise your hand if I say, oh, do you want to build a high performance culture? The answer would be yes. How do you get to that is what we're going to cover. So early on, there's a little story out here. When I eventually joined Meta after I left Amazon, I was asking people, what's the culture at Meta? A very tiny company, 1,500 people at that point in time. And one of the kind of tidbits of knowledge that I got was someone told me, saying, just look at the company. If you want to understand their culture, look at who they hire, who they fire, and who they promote. That's your culture. Right? And actually, it's to a large extent, you can use that barometer to say, how is this company shaping up? And remember, who you hire, who you fire, and who you promote is your decision. So you are setting that culture. So you really get this right, you get to work really well. Okay, let's jump into core compensation principles. We're going to go through 6 different topics pretty quickly. What those core programs are. What is market competitiveness? How do you stay competitive with respect to the market? How do you align performance management and compensation, right? How do you adjust for geography, which is so unique, right? You're sitting in, let's say, over here in London, you got employees in Romania, someone in Vietnam, and 2 in India. How do you kind of think about compensation, right? How do you think about dilution? You got your board to answer, you got your investors to answer, you got your employees to answer. Is X dilution right? Is Y dilution right? How do you kind of think about it? And then how do you communicate this with being open and transparent? If an employee asking, how do I get promoted out here? Or how did you make a decision to give me this % of equity? Do you have a really good answer? Think about the core programs as something like, do you pay for performance? Is that one of your core programs pillars? Most likely it is. And what levers do you have on your core compensation programs? You could say, I'm going to have base and bonus as my cash. I'm going to have equity and tokens as my long-term incentives. Then the next question that you're going to be asked to answer is, do you pull the levers for all the 4? Should I just have base? We're just 5 people right now. I just want 1 cash number, 1 equity number. I'm not thought through token yet, so I want to kind of still get people over here. So that could be another way to think about it. And so you start to build your core programs and saying, these are my core principles when it comes to my core compensation program. Once you have that, then you get into this whole kind of conundrum of market competitiveness. Where do you go for the data to say, I want to position my compensation at X percentile of this market? So imagine I've given you 2 variables out here. X percentile, I want to pay at the 75th percentile. Great. Of what? That's the next question that you're going to ask. Is it 75th percentile of the startup market, of the crypto market, of all fintech and large companies, of all private companies, of all seed stage companies, or a hybrid of seed stage, Series A and Series B? The 2 variables became 10 right now. So that's when you kind of think about how do you stay competitive from a market standpoint and have a clear point of view on being market competitive. And then the question starts to become saying, how do I align this with performance management? For 3 people, does performance management make sense? Should I introduce it at 5 or 7 or 10 people? Should I pay for performance, which is individual? Or should I pay for performance, which is individual plus company? Do I think about like increasing people's base compensation or giving people more tokens, more equities based on just individual performance or company performance? So it really starts to, so that's then you get a good answer of aligning your compensation strategy with your performance strategy. The fourth one is adjusting for geographies. We spoke about it briefly, but really having a very clear point of view. Okay, do I pay everybody UK salaries? Or I have these 2 amazing smart contract engineers in Sofia in Bulgaria. Do I pay them local salaries there? But do I pay local salaries for base? But do I pay a global token and equity strategy? That's the question that you need to answer. So to have a really good sense of how do you align for geography. To say, look, the whole point of me having geographically distributed talent is for 2 reasons. 1, I get access to great talent. Plus 2, I want to kind of reduce my cost. So when you kind of think about those 2, then your answers to how you position yourself from a geography standpoint changes. The fifth one is dilution. Every time you hire a new employee, you're diluting. Every time you promote someone, you're diluting. Every time you get to 1 or 2 years, you're diluting. How do you think about dilution? And the last one we talked about, and I won't spend too much time on that, is communication and transparency. Now, quickly, let's jump into this. Think about your basic components of your compensation strategy. At the foundation of this is leveling. We'll talk a lot about that, and I'll spend probably 2 minutes on leveling over here. If you don't level people, which is a proxy for saying, if I don't think about a job from an architectural standpoint, if I don't think about a job from what I expect from it, then you will expect everybody to be, like you as a co-founder. If someone is 21, just outside college, who's probably got 1 year of experience, a very different set of outputs that you're going to get from him or her compared to someone who's 30 with 7 years of experience. So leveling is your core infrastructure that you need to get it done. If you don't have leveling, it'll hurt you, period. Many companies right now, they've gotten to 20, 25 people, no leveling infrastructure, and they try to put leveling in place. They get it done, but it's painful. The sooner you get leveling done, the better it is from a compensation standpoint. Then you can define a job, an architecture, and everything else that goes with it. And then we talked about these 4 things, base, bonus, equity, and tokens. Your 4 key levers. You got to think about which ones you want to pull. And then as you kind of think about that, you get to then think about what is my refresh strategy? Do I give people a vesting schedule of 4 years versus a vesting schedule of 1 year? Do I give people refresh at the end of 2 years, or do I give them an annual refresh? Or the other question that founders ask me, hey, Madan, our market is so volatile right now. I don't want to give someone at today's price for 4 years. I want them to earn their equity every single year. So I'm going to drive equity and performance management every single year. I'm going to grant them equity every single year based on the then price of your equity or your token. It's dramatically different. Employees will say, no, I want you to lock in the price today because I'm taking such a big risk coming and joining you. So why would I not take advantage of the increase in token or equity prices? You have to kind of balance these 2. As you think about all of these, then you would get to a point of saying, hey, I have a really good way of answering these 2 questions. When I hire people, I know how to make an offer to them. And I know that I'm going to be consistent about those offers. I'm building that on a base of leveling, a job infrastructure, a job architecture that I've thought through. I'm not going to make random hiring decisions. And therefore, I'm going to make very good decisions in compensation. And as my company starts to grow, I start to truly attract great people and be very fair and consistent in how I reward, promote, recognize them. And then eventually, also on the other side, look at mediocrity and look at making sure that my company doesn't become a bunch of mediocre people, but it's truly pay for performance and there's a culture of high performance. So this is a lot of data, right? To think about what you need to do in addition to getting product market fit, you got to deal with compensation, you got to deal with all the elements that I just talked to you about. So, once you look at your total compensation model, this leads to you getting to where you are over here, which is base, performance bonus, is your total cash, we talked about it, equity and tokens, get you to your long-term incentives. Hopefully the last 12 and a half minutes has helped you get through what each one of them are. We're going to jump into the fireside chat right now.
That was great. So clearly a lot to be thinking about when it comes to compensation. To keep you on the spot, I think to start, you just walked through a lot of the principles for this, right? And like the things that ideally you're strategizing on, you've aligned on a vision for this. I'm curious now to hear, I mean, you've been with A16Z Crypto for a couple of months now, and you've become a pretty popular guy across all the founders within our portfolio because there are so many topics and questions that we have in this area. So curious how the reality is existing today within our portfolio.
Yeah.
Again, you just walked us through all the principles. What are you actually seeing within our portfolio?
Yeah. I've had a chance to meet about 60 plus portfolio companies so far. I can kind of put it into two camps, Craig. One is founders who've taken comp very seriously, and they've taken the hard hit on biting the bullet, writing a comp strategy, committing to leveling infrastructure, and then committing to a very clear, consistent, this is how I'm going to make offers, this is how I'm going to make refresh strategies. And then some founders who haven't done it because they haven't focused on it, not that they were callous, but they were just not focused on it. There were other things that they were focused on, and they've gotten to 20, 25, 30 people, they don't have it, and then there's a pain to get it done. So that's the first overall trend. You're either committed to it pretty early, or you kind of take some time and then you have to go through the pain of doing it. And then the second one is founders very clearly knowing that we have a very unique opportunity. I look at the positives out here, probably we're the only industry where you get a chance to provide liquidity to your employees pretty early if you tokenize. It is such a big draw to hire world-class talent. It is unbelievable when some founders, as many of our portcos are tokenized, the talent that they've been able to attract is just off the charts. Or even having conversations around tokenization and saying this is a chance to go to be liquid is very helpful. I just want to throw in one caveat to make sure anything on tokenization, you got to get legal to clear what you can and what you can't say. It is fraught with danger. So I want to make sure that this is post-legal clearing it, that you have conversations of tokenization. So that's the trend that I'm seeing, committing to comp, writing up the comp strategy. Many of our co-founders now, founders and co-founders, have said, hey, Madan, we're going to publish this one-page comp strategy. Give me your feedback, and we'll send it out to the entire company. That's a really good kind of positive way to kind of build your culture.
Awesome. So somewhat of a segue, I guess, into the next question, and that's double-clicking on maybe some of the areas where that hasn't gone as well, or some common traps that founders are falling into in compensation.
Yeah, great question. And one of the common traps that you will fall into is really thinking through what does the founding team mean? Is founding team the first 5 people you hire? Is just for the founding team, should it have a different set of grants? Should it just be based on your job? Or it's a part of the founding team, I'm going to give you 2.5% of equity. The traps that you will fall into because you're trying to attract your first, second, third employee is over-diluting very quickly. So you have to really think through, if I'm giving someone 2.5% of my company, is this a unique one-of-one talent that I cannot find anywhere else? For example, let's say you hire someone, your 5th or 6th employee, who's a very good ops person, who's getting everything done on your ops, great with product operations, customer operations, et cetera. Yeah, you got to pay that person really well, but would you pay the person 4% of your company? But if you don't think through this, you might end up saying, oh, this is my founding employee, that I'm going to give all my founding hires very, very high level of grants, and that will kill your employee pool. So that's the first common trap that I ask founders to say, be clear about who your founding team is and who's not, and how you think about founding team grants. And the second one is very quickly making sure that you have a very clear point of view on what your market is. Like founders are like, oh, I want to pay at the 80th or 75th percentile of the global crypto market. There is no standard for global crypto market, right? You got to reduce that further to say, I'm going to pay 75th percentile of this set in this country, and then build your ranges. So that's the common trap, which is especially on founding team grants, and also the fact, we talked about it, I won't repeat it, which is lack of leveling is where you're going to face the most pain. Here's an example. You hired an early stage employee, he was amazing, you got to 10 people, your engineers are saying, that guy should not be here. Now, you really like the guy because he really helped you get off the ground. So what do? You turn around and say, oh, he's going to be my chief of staff. You just took a role that you could have gotten the world's greatest chief of staff with chief of staff experience, and you gave it to someone who probably doesn't have the intention or certainly doesn't have the skills. You're taking a bet. I'm not saying don't do it, but you have to be very intentional when someone in the team is not meeting the bar or is no longer relevant. It's impossible for you to say, I'm going to just tell the person to leave. That's not how you build great companies. But you have to make sure that you don't compromise the talent that you would get for each role. That's another thing that I've found, or as a trap that you need to be careful.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah, and I would echo that as well. I think that's something that we've seen, really in many different organizations. Just because you need to hire your first ops person does not make that person your COO. It is possible that you would be hiring that person long term, but thinking about what is the role today, what does this role look like 12 months later? And is this person going to be the right fit for the role? These are all things that, it's always easier to promote someone than it is to demote somebody after the fact. So, certainly something you should be keeping in mind as you're building that founding team.
Just real quick on this topic, I think a common trap that early stage founders miss on is having a discipline and some sort of a plan on your first few hires, like to what Madan was kind of saying. Paying someone like 4%, 5%, and then it's a slippery slope from there, right? Like the next person you want to hire, you may not be able to bring them on because your pool is much lower. And so I think having a plan up front on what you can allocate to each of your critical hires, and we'll touch on this a little bit later on headcount planning, I think is really important. And then naturally people, you have to assume will talk about their compensation. And so you may have a rock star, you didn't have that discipline when you first hired them, you pay them like 4%, you get the second person on who's also amazing, they only got 2%, they're at a happy hour or something and they talk about it. Now you have an issue with internal disparity on compensation and you got to go back and fix it. But now your pool's running short. You can't give them both 4%. So it's a problem that you might not have a solution to. You don't want to lose that first person because the second person's unhappy. You may end up losing both. So I think to the degree that you can, having a plan in place and really sticking to it, because in the moment you may get really excited and just want to offer it to that person to close them. I think thinking through this and having a talk track to get that person to understand why you can't meet that expectation for them and you can revisit it later, like thinking through all those dynamics will help you a lot in the long run.
Awesome. Yeah, and sticking on the topic of headcount planning, Mehdi, maybe we'll just let you continue the thought, and I'd love to hear from Madan on this too. But Mehdi, just in terms of headcount planning, curious, what have you seen work well in certain organizations? Again, what are the things they need to be thinking about as they craft the plan and then actually start executing on it as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a million ways to do headcount planning, all the way from like the FANG companies, working your way backwards. You don't need to be that intricate in terms of having like a finance team doing this crazy complex thing. But at early stage, at a minimum, being able to roadmap as far out as possible, like what is the product that you're building? 12 months, 18 months, 6 months, whatever it is, you may not have all the answers up front, but to however far you can predict what it is you need to ship and the features that go along with it, and then reverse engineering and working your way backwards. I think a common mistake that people don't do in headcount planning is they start hiring freely because they just meet people and they bring them on. And to Madan's point earlier, and Craig, like what you don't want to do is you bring someone on because you got excited about them. They don't actually fit a need that you have right now. So now you're trying to, take a square peg in a circle hole and fill that in, and the person just doesn't match. And at this rate of an early stage startup, you don't want to be spending money that you don't have to spend. I mean, cash is really important and critical. So if you can plan ahead and know that like 12 months, I need to ship these 3 features, which means I need these 2 engineers, a back end, a front end, whatever that is, you can be a lot more disciplined to the roles that you have, the specs that you're going to create, versus just getting excited about someone out there. And so I think it's beginning to put some sort of framework together, budgeting across that, which also goes into the compensation aspect of it. But having something that you can follow will keep you disciplined so you don't deviate from the plan and get into a situation that you're now kind of stuck or having to fire people, which also isn't fun and could be bad for morale because of a mistake you made.
Yeah, great point, Mehdi. And the way I think about headcount planning is you're designing every job, right? As Mehdi said, you got to hire a bunch of people because you got roadmap commitment. From a headcount planning standpoint, you basically like, can I design this job? And I use a simple framework called time span of discretion. If this is of any interest to anyone, I'll explain this more, which is basically how long can someone go without needing intervention from you. So a staff engineer's time span of discretion ideally is about 4 weeks, meaning you tell her, hey, you got to deliver this, and hopefully in 4 weeks, you don't need intervention, she gets it done for you. But if your senior SWE or SWE's time span of discretion is probably 2 weeks. Your SWE's time span of discretion is every week. And to Mehdi's point, when let's say you want to hire 3 people, your job as a founder is to really design, kind of think about, do I need a staff engineer or do I need a SWE? If you don't think about it, you're just going to say yes to someone who meets your skill matrix, but not your complexity matrix. So you stop before you sign off an offer and say, is it over-leveled, is it under-leveled, or is it appropriately leveled? That will then kind of make the right decision from a headcount planning standpoint, and then you can back into that with all the things we talked about. Okay, for a SWE, how's the compensation different than a staff engineer? What's the equity that's different? And how do you also measure their performance? If you don't think about the complexity of a job from a design standpoint, you would expect everyone to be delivering at a particular output, but that might not be the case depending on who you bring. So time span of discretion, super important. Design your job or just architect that role and have that in your head saying, okay, this is a staff engineer role. Or this is a senior SWE role, and someone says, meet this great principal engineer, let's just get him. You might not have a role that's so complex, you're going to disappoint him, plus you're going to expect very different things from that person. So be very careful about that. So from a headcount planning standpoint, time span of discretion, to Mary's point, really think through what kind of people that you want and just be very fastidious about it. Do not sway once you make the call. Then you can kind of build great company. Just to give you an example, right? Early on in Meta, it's there somewhere on the web, many employees who joined them pre-IPO had to take a haircut of 2 levels on titles. If you're a VP somewhere, you would join them as a manager. If you're a director, you would join them as a junior manager. So basically, they went down this path and says, title makes no difference. We're going to look for what you can create impact and then build a company. So have a point of view is generally how you could be really good at headcount planning.
Awesome. Leads us to the next question, which is around performance management. And obviously, a big part of what we were just talking through is having strategy, having a hiring plan, having executing on the plan. Part of that is the then performance of these hires that you've made, and ultimately, are they meeting what you define the role as, what you define the responsibilities at, and fitting the roadmap that you guys have for your products. So, Madan, curious to hear your general thoughts on performance management, both I guess in general, but also at such an early stage. A common thing that we'll hear from founders is not wanting bureaucracy or a lot of process around this, and early startup employees oftentimes don't want to deal with these things either. Yeah. But clearly it's a very important part of managing your company and running your business. So yeah. Madan, curious to hear your thoughts on this.
This is a really interesting concept called regression to the mean. Right? Regression to the mean is an interesting concept where you bring a group of people that generally regress to the least an acceptable performance that is in place. So if you don't have a performance management system, then most people, especially your top performers, have no incentive to outperform every single time. It doesn't matter if you want to call that bureaucratic or not, but if you don't have a system of giving feedback and a culture of this feedback in your company, you are going to the system is going to entropy to the mean. You will regress to the mean. So that's something that you want to avoid. That's a very interesting tidbit I want to share. So my first day at Meta, I go in, this guy, Chamath is there, and many of you know who Chamath is. He's the S team leader. So basically, somebody from Zuck's team comes and says hello to us and then onboards us. And it's a 30-minute program, a 30-minute kind of session. He comes in right away, he says, my name is Chamath. We're only 20 people. Meta is still very tiny at that point in time, right? 20 people, new hire board. He looks at us and says, half of you in this room fooled Meta to get the job. We'll find you and fire you, and the other half, welcome to Facebook. I was like, everyone was like, which half do I belong, right? So it was so this is a really, really, really good example on how you can kind of shock the system. I'm not saying use it, so please don't. I mean, that's not my intention out here, but they took performance management serious very, very early, very quickly. So my suggestion is commit to a culture of feedback. Whether you like it or not, find simple ways to give feedback, try to encourage some version of a feedback system that works for you. Number 2, once you have consistent level of feedback, you will then start to create, as you get to 5 to 10 people, some version of a performance program. You could simply be like, are you on track or not every quarter? I want to know, as an employee from you, as my manager, am I on track or not? You don't need to commit to a crazy 8 rating, 5 rating system, etc. Not yet, but you need to commit, you owe it to me as my manager to let me know whether I'm on track or not. And then as you get a little bit more complex, you also owe it to me to develop my skills and kind of help me grow. Otherwise, somebody else in the market is going to do that. I'm going to go there. So just these three alone, committing to a feedback of culture, committing to a feedback or on track, off track, how are you doing, and are you on the right track to get to the next level, is a good start to your performance management program.
Madan, just to double click on that a little bit, I'm curious how you think about individual performance management versus the entire company and kind of team-wide performance or trying to meet roadmap deadlines or whatever.
There's a pretty famous study that basically says it's the Pareto law that applies to any cohort group, which is 80% of your impact comes from 20% of people at any point in time. They showed that it could be a group of sportsmen, musicians, politicians, employees, any cohort. You have the 80-20 rule applying pretty consistently, et cetera. So if you go by that science, you're going to kind of see very quickly when you have 10 people that about 2 or 3 of them have outperformed the rest for those 6 months. I'm not saying they will continue to be the same set of people over many months, but you will find a set of people, it could be 5, it could be 2, that have outperformed the rest. And it is really, you owe it to them to recognize and reward that. There's a pretty shocking rule that Netflix has on its website. You can check it right now. They basically, on their culture page, they say, mediocrity meets with a generous severance at Netflix. That's a real example of performance management on the other end, right? They're saying, we will not tolerate mediocrity. And if you are mediocre, then we're going to say, sorry, this is not the right place. We'll give you a great severance. We'll shake hands. We'll respectfully say goodbye. This is Netflix, and they have the guts to publish that. I appreciate that on their website. It's still there, I think. I'm sure it's there even now. It's there on their culture deck. That's a real example of saying I take performance management seriously, and I'm going to find ways that are going to work for me, right? You have to find your own individual style, but do not shy away. Remember that we're all, as humans, giving people feedback is the hardest thing for you to do, for anyone. Right? If Craig want to give me feedback, it has to be, we have to set time, we have to do it. He has to make sure it's kind of messaged properly with good example. It's painful. But you have to commit to that for you to get the best from your art.
Yeah, Netflix is a unique example there too. Obviously very well known for the high performance culture, and to the point to where their performance management has really defined their culture in a lot of ways. Again, like as you're interviewing for a role at Netflix, they send you that culture deck. They send you the, mediocrity is the enemy of what we're trying to build here, or whatever the exact phrase was. But they let people know that from the very, very beginning and really own that culture. And again, it's a culture performance. It's easier to manage employees once they're there. Expectations have been set from the beginning, and really makes the lives of middle managers and folks that are leading organizations much easier to enforce that high performance culture.
Yeah. Craig, can I add one more thing really
Sure.
interesting? All 3 of us, we have Meta as our common thread, Craig, myself, and Mehdi. When Meta was about 1,000, not even 1,000, about 500, 600 people, they committed to these extreme levels of paying for performance using this power law. When they came up with this rating system, that's there even to this day, if I'm right. At Meta, you have a meets expectation rating at the middle, and you have 3 above, exceeds, greatly exceeds, and redefines, and then 2 below, meets most and meets some, and then does not meet. The person getting a greatly exceeds and a person getting redefines have bonus multipliers and equity multipliers that will shock you. The person getting redefines gets a 3x multiplier on their bonus and equity for that half. 3x. So if let's say you're making 200K, you got a 30% bonus, that's 60K for the half of 30K. You get 90K for the half if you're redefined. Sure, there's only 5% of the entire company can be redefined. They're very strict about that, and they go through a lot of checks and balances. But that's an example of not shying away from the fact that as soon as you get to a decent-sized group of 8 or 10 people, you are going to find these extremes. And you have to kind of ask yourself, do you want to commit to that extreme performance kind of skew and the rewards that go with it? It will change your culture. There's no 2 ways about it.
Awesome. Mehdi, on the topic of good performance, obviously, again, Mehdi leads our executive talent function here, tons of leadership experience across our crypto portfolio. And curious, Mehdi, what really makes great leadership at such an early stage, and what things do you need to be looking for during the hiring process to ensure that good performance comes from a leadership level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think before I touch on what you want to look for in a leadership hire that you're making, I think the common mistake people make, even at later stage companies and public companies, is not having their own rubric of what they're looking for done the right way. Because I think if you go out there and you're only interviewing a candidate, assessing them for their skills, you're forgetting what they're looking at in terms of where they're going to join, how buttoned up you are, and even for you to have a framework on what it is you're looking for. Again, to like that headcount planning thing that we were talking about, I think to some degree, putting a plan out there and looking at what is it I'm actually trying to hire in this person, in this role, having discipline to the skill sets. One thing we do at A16Z really well is this thing called a mock. It's a missions, outcomes, competencies, but it really helps you put a plan together. Anyone interested in this, I can ship this out to all of you. It's a great way to start thinking about like, what is the purpose of this role? What are the outcomes I want this person to deliver on 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and then the competencies behind it. But I think a lot of people don't put this together when they're looking for candidates, and so they completely miss out on what is actually good for what I need because they're just hiring again. Most people can interview really well, but then they might not actually deliver to the skill set, and this happens a lot. So you bring on someone, you think they're great, it's really expensive, and at a leadership level, the PR behind this, the internal morale, when you bring someone and have to fire them can be devastating, and it can take you much longer to backfill that because then you got the ripple effect of what happened to that person. Now I'm scared. You don't know what you're looking for. It can just become really messy. So having a plan up front, I think, is really important. On the opposite end, I think in addition to like the skill set that comes to the function you're trying to hire for, you want to look for things that matter a lot, especially for an early stage startup. Like, do they have a track record of working in startups? Have they been through this before? Can they handle it, the ups and downs? I mean, if someone's only been at a Meta or an Apple or a Google, will they know what it looks like for like serious failure to come or being at the brink of that? And do they know how to rally a team beyond that? And so I think you should look for people who have that track record of doing that. Are they a builder? Are they not a builder? Are they mission led? Are they mercenaries? Things like that that you can assess in your interview process. And I think one of the biggest things and most important things to look for in a leadership hire is the culture aspect that defines your view of the company. And every founder is going to be different on this. And so I think if someone comes across as amazing, they have an amazing track record, you've looked them up, done references, back channels, but they don't align with you, I think it's important to have that discipline up front and eventually potentially passing on them so you don't make that mistake of bringing them in and then having this whole like layer. Because the first few hires that you make will define the future culture of your company because they're going to be the ones that build the teams underneath them and imprint that culture into those folks. Another thing I think to look at is what is their network? Like, when you hire executives into your company, especially at the early stage, you want them to be a good extension of your brand and be able to bring in that talent internally to your company. So that way you're not the only one who's attracting those people over. And then the last thing I want to talk about is back channels. I think the art of the back channel is something really critical, and a lot of people don't use this. Can spend more time on this individually with anyone who wants to learn more about this, but making sure you do this. So in addition to the references that they give you, ask people that you might know, network like crazy. It could also give you more connections for your own personal network of what you want to build. But asking the questions that you probably won't be able to ask, like, what is this person like in their worst moments? Like, what are things I should be aware of? What can you tell me 2 to 3 things that can help me manage them and set them up for success, in addition to like, should I be careful and watch out for them? But I think that's something you want to look for when you're making your first few leadership hires.
Yeah, I want to double click into a couple things there. And you mentioned the idea around builders versus non-builders, mission-led, versus vision-led, and mercenaries versus missionaries. Thinking through, a CV is only going to tell you so much about somebody and their background, their resume. It's only going to tell you so much. We'll meet with founders that will tell us things like, I don't want to hire an engineering leader from Google or from Meta or from a large, stable company. They're not going to do well in our startup scene. And obviously, well, that might be true in a lot of cases. It's not going to be true in every case, right? And so I think double clicking into the again, builders versus non-builders, what are things you're looking for? And I guess obviously that's highlighted a little bit more when the talent is coming from larger companies, larger organizations. So how do you assess for that in the interview process?
Yeah, so I think doing some research up front when you're interviewing a candidate to like, what are the places that they've worked? And then figuring out from there, like, do you respect that brand? Do you respect that product and the success that they had there? Would you qualify that specific company as a startup or a late stage company? Asking them questions on, was I the person who helped make that happen? Was it the team underneath me? Was it the brand of the company? Was I just a cog in the machine? Especially at an early stage startup, I think it's important that you want to find people who was the actual builder and not just a piece of that, because then you may find they come in and they're like, I need to hire 10 people who can actually do this because I myself have never done it. So I think it's like, again, 2 parts. Yeah, like assessing them for their actual skill set that they did, asking questions questions that they probably can't prepare for, doing some sort of like a work trial or experiment on like something that you need to try and solve, and getting a sense of like over 4 to 5 hours that they spend time on. Are they actually able to deliver on this and do it, on the fly, or did they lean on somebody else? So I think that's always going to be something really important. But ultimately, yeah, looking at their backgrounds, the companies, your own thoughts on them, and then the reputation of those, and then what their role was specifically to that.
Got it. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I want to really plug in on what Mehdi said on the mock. If you don't have that, I've just seen that your hiring strategy becomes a moving goalpost, because every time you find someone, since you don't have a clear structure or a standard, which the mock really helps you get, you're always like, I can find someone better. Or you go into a debrief where all of you are yes votes, and this is just happened last week, and then you start to talk about the person. You don't have a standard, you don't have something like a mock, and then you all come out and say it's a no hire. 7 of you voted yes, and your final outcome was no. So either your process is deeply broken, or you're kind of having a moving goalpost that you need to stop. To your point, Mehdi, it's probably one of the simplest things you can commit to. You should see the way we've kind of set up the mock and how we've kind of defined that for every role. And then hold people accountable, especially in the debrief, to talk about that with respect to those standards. Otherwise, your debriefs are going to be free for all. You could take one thing that might be very minor, and that could trip the candidate completely. And that, again, you are the person who's the architect of your hiring culture as well, and your compensation culture, and your people culture, and everything else. So that's the fun of being a founder. But that's something that I would add, saying have a standard. Otherwise, every one of your hiring discussions is a moving goalpost. It will frustrate some of your engineers. They're like, I voted yes or I voted no, but the outcome was totally opposite of this. So that's something that I would ask you to watch out for.
Awesome. All right, so moving on to our last topic, which is quite a hot topic in Web3, and something I know you get asked questions about all the time, token compensation. Now, we realize not every company in this room is going to produce a token, but some of you will be, and even if you're not, likely talent that you're going to be competing for is going to have competing offers or opportunities that are offering them some sort of token compensation. And so, obviously this is new, it's controversial. As Madan gave, the preface earlier, anything we say around tokens, make sure you guys are consulting with your legal teams, your GCs. There is no one right way to do this. It needs to be custom to your organization. But with all that said, Madan, just general thoughts on token compensation. Like, should this be approached the same way equity is, and companies that don't have token compensation? What are some of the key drivers or things that they need to be thinking about if this is part of their overall compensation program?
Yeah, great point, Craig. In terms of like the one thing that you said, I want to stress on, whether you have tokens or not. When you attract employees, they're going to have offers from companies that have tokens, right? So you have to kind of find a way to get around this, or have a pretty clear way of talking about it. So let's assume, so there are 2 buckets out here. You're thinking of a token. You're not yet on mainnet, but you want to give away a bunch of tokens to your early employees, and also to the community, because that helps to kind of really launch your product. And then the first question you want to answer is, what part of my overall compensation should tokens be comprised of? Should it be 20%, 40%? Or if somebody came to me and said, I just made a bunch of money in my previous job, I don't want any of your salary, I want 90% or 99% of your total compensation in tokens, would you give that person the 99% of 200K in tokens? So these are the first things that you really need to ask, to say, what does token compensation do to drive certain behaviors in your company? Does token compensation allow you to attract great talent? Does it allow you to kind of connect talent directly to the outcomes that you want from the way your company is going? So that's your first step. And then 2, what % of that should comprise of your total comp? My general advice is it has to be a slightly smaller %. Let's assume it's 90% of somebody's comp and your token goes to kind of price dramatically. That person is not thinking about doing any work. They're thinking about, how do I kind of make my ends meet? How do I pay for my bills this week? And so it is pretty dramatic how things shift. Just in the last one, if you look at any of the publicly available token prices, so imagine that if you have a big chunk of your token compensation tied to tokens, then you're going to have different set of behaviors. 2, the second thing that founders ask me, and we get to talk about, is token compensation the same as equity compensation? hey, Madan, most of my engineers don't care about equity. They're like, are you going on mainnet? I need tokens. I need a base salary. I'm done with it. So should I give equity or not? No, should I probably give equity just to my core key leaders and founding team and keep the equity and not dilute it, but then use the token to drive behavior? That's a pretty significant strategic question that you need to ask and kind of find good answers for. Or you might say the third bucket, which many of you might be saying, we have no plans for any tokens. Then it starts to become, what is your equity strategy, right? Do you offer a 4-year grant with X amount of vesting, or do you offer an annual grant? We talked about this last time. And what percent of your equity, or what does equity comprise of? How much of that is a part of your total compensation? So then it goes back to basic foundational things we talked about, that if every one of your job has a level and has a total compensation number that you can pull from a credible data source, then you can make that call. You can say a staff engineer gets paid at the 90th percentile in a FANG company at $540K. You're not going to be able to afford $540K, right? You're like, I can afford probably $120K. The rest of them has to come in the form of equity. And then the question starts to become, should I price the equity at today's price? Hey, Madan, we're already seeing 300% growth in our developer adoption. So should I price the equity at a future number? And therefore, what's the total amount of equity that I need to give? That is the kind of discussion that you need to have. There is no kind of playbook for this to say this is the answer for each one of them, but there's a playbook for the questions that you need to ask me or any one of them, your mentors, your VCs, etc., to find answers to that. But the key is, if you really want to take away one thing, commit to a leveling infrastructure, because then you can commit to a total comp number, a math number for every job. That is it. Then the rest of it is going to be a function, a subvariant of that total number. You could say, oh, this total number for this job is X. I've pegged this number based on, I want to pay the 75th percentile of this market. That's my comp strategy. Sorry, if you don't like it, it's not the right place for you. And then you start going about saying how much of it has to be base, how much of it has to be tokens, how much of it has to be equity. If you don't get that number, it goes back to this previous example of this moving goalpost, because that number will keep moving. Somebody from, let's say, Google will say, or some Meta will say, I worked at DM, I was making 600K, so I need that number. Someone else will say I was making 900K, or I'll sign up for 300K. It means nothing. Once you commit to that number, then the noise goes away. So we've got some pretty good data, not on the comp numbers for crypto companies, but we've got very good data for C-level exec, for marketing, sales, finance, HR, legal, etc. So that would be a pretty good data set. And then all our portcos get access to PAVE, right? You get free access to PAVE, P-A-V-E. If you don't have it, it's a compensation database. It's an A16Z portco company. You get free access. I'll kind of send that over to folks. And that's a really good start for you to say, how should I think about this number? You can go to PAVE and say, I want to pay at the 50th percentile or 75th percentile, private companies, Series A, less than this capital raised. You will get pretty good data for most jobs. That's a good start. Then as you get bigger, then you might say, I want to cut my own data. I want to kind of spend $20,000 at 80 people because it's so complex. And many of our portcos are doing it as they get to 50, 80 people. I want to cut a separate cohort. My cohort is going to be a combination of 5 crypto companies, me and 3 others, and Coinbase and Circle and Paxos or something else, 3 fintech companies, Stripe, Square, ADN, and 2 large tech companies, Meta and Uber. This is a real life example of a crypto company that I know has cut its cohort data. And then we want to pay 75th percentile of this cohort market. How did they pick this number? Most of the employees they were getting came from these companies. And most of the people they were losing to were going back to these companies. That's a scientific way of getting your compensation working for you.
Awesome. And Mehdi, obviously token compensation was something you guys dealt with quite a bit at Chainlink as well. And understand if you can't get into all the details of that, but curious if you just have any high level learnings from how you guys set up the token program and the changes you guys had to make, during the years that you were there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of considerations when you're either paying out people in tokens or competing with them if you're in traditional equity, and they can work in your favor, and you can use them, opposite to sell or to counter against. But volatility is something that you have to take into consideration. And so different programs that you create or reviews of compensation is probably something that you have to look at, because this thing moves up and down like crazy. And so you have to be very thoughtful. Employees will be happy in month 3, unhappy in month 6. And so what are the programs that you're building, which we can talk about separately, because there's many different ways to do your comp philosophy, as Madan touched upon. And the second thing is incentivizing people to the protocol that you're building, right?
Yeah.
I think when you go to mainnet and you have a publicly traded token, it's a big part of the actual network working. And so like having a lockup in place that aligns with more traditional equity, because that's naturally built in. If you have options with the companies, typically like a 7 to 10 year cycle before people are made liquid. And so they're usually incentivized to stick with the program and be with the company and build towards that goal, where in tokenized, it's an advantage to some degree because you get that liquidity a lot quicker. But you also have people who then maybe become, very successful in 2 or 3 years. And so how do you put parameters in place that allow people to still stick with the project, still be incentivized, because people want to join an early stage startup for that upside and for the potential for it to grow. But yeah, doing like a 4-year lockup instead of a 1-year lockup, things like that you should put into consideration. And that's something we highly encourage, doing like a 1-year cliff on your lockup and then equal unlock for the remainder 3 years.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, obviously, as Madan and Mehdi have been speaking here, there's not one right way to do compensation. There's not one right way to set up a total rewards program. A lot of these things are decisions you're going to have to make as founders, and strategies that you guys are going to have to commit to and then execute, over a certain period of years. And it's not going to be easy to do. I mean, Madan on his slides was talking through all of the different variables, all the things you need to think about, and that is something you need to do. You need to have a strategy in place for each of these variables. But again, it's not the same recipe at every single organization. And you're going to come to a point to where you've committed to a certain comp strategy or kind of philosophy, and you'll lose talent because of it. You're going to come across a candidate who is outside of the bands. And of course, like there are exceptions that can be made from time to time, but sticking firm to, your overall compensation philosophy, keeping a fair and just organization underneath you is something that is much easier when you're very strategic. You've laid out, this is my philosophy on all of these variables, and stick to it, for years to come. So that's all we had for the kind of preset questions. We're now going to turn it open to Q&A. Happy to answer anything, talent, recruiting, HR, people practices related. We're here for you.
How long would you give a new hire to kind of set the tone and ship and see what they're really capable of? What's a good way to do that? And sort of how to think about that first month with that new hire of figuring out, do they have the goods or do they not?
It's a great question, because there's one thing before that you owe a new hire, which is how do you onboard her to success? If you just hope the person will come in and kind of create magic, it's generally hard. So just even putting the contours of a decent onboarding program, saying here are the knowledge bases, here are the people that you can go to, here's what I expect at the end of 30 days in terms of learning outcomes. That's all you need to tell someone who's highly, once you do that, you would pretty much know in about 90 days. In 30 days, you would know if this is a good culture fit or not, if they're energized, excited, et cetera. In 90 days, you're going to know if this is the right fit or not, right? I think so. I generally like to do a 30-day check-in. I mean, that's what Craig did with me as well. A 30-day check-in. He had a 45-day check-in, and I think I'm coming up to my 90-day check-in now as well, which is very helpful. And for me, the way it is like to just design your onboarding it doesn't need to be elaborate, but learning outcomes. Saying, hey, new hire, this is what I want you to learn. And then you want to kind of give people the benefit of doubt in terms of execution might take some time because they're still trying to figure out the ways of working over here. But you don't want to give them benefit of doubt from an intellectual curiosity standpoint. If the person is not curious at all, just shows up to say, what do I do, and waits for, I've got from point A to B, now where do I go next? You know that at the stage that you're in, that's not going to work. But they're hyper curious, they're constantly asking, seeking, learning, questioning, and they might still have some teething trouble as far as executing in the way that you want. Give them the benefit of doubt there, but don't give them the benefit of doubt of the intellectual curiosity, which actually goes back to saying, if you can add this into your MOC on how you hire people, and that itself is a totally different a topic that we can go into, might be very helpful to avoid these pitfalls.
Just to add to that, I think this is where the outcomes of that mock I talked about is really critical. Like knowing ahead of time, what are the outcomes for this person that I'm bringing on, and within reasonable, expectations, what I expect them to do in the 30, 60, 90 day. And this is where like performance management can also play a part on this, because if someone comes in and they're just crushing your outcomes, like 30 days, they've already done 60 days worth of stuff, then like they're doing what they need to do, but at a higher level. So someone you want to keep an eye out on. And I think founders tend to miss on this of like identifying who are your rock stars in the company. And like, of course, you want to love everybody that you're bringing on, but you obviously want to be thoughtful and extra paying more attention to the ones who are just crushing it, so that you can think about them when your comp review cycle comes up, or rewarding them on the spot. And so I think having that rubric and framework ahead of time will allow you to be able to start figuring out what that performance management philosophy does look like.
Just a great point, Mehdi, because most founders, I've done this for the last 6 years, worked with so many founders, you are going to get sucked into managing poor performance, not working well, this is not the right thing, we made a mistake here, etc. And you forget to identify and recognize your stars. You just assume that they're going to keep producing great stuff. So just be aware of this, that when you find a way to celebrate and someone's great performance, be very celebratory in your approach, because your time is going to go as you get to 10, 20 people. So-and-so is not working out, the wrong role, wrong level, is not engaged, or wants to take 6 months off, is traveling the world, not engaged. So many of those problems that you will face, so just be aware of that. It's a great point.
Actually, I don't want to touch on this because I think it's really important. I don't want to miss on this. Knowing when to fire somebody and having the discipline to do it. I think a lot of founders within our portfolio have done talks on this, and we've had time with them as they're looking to offboard someone. And a common mistake is letting someone stick around too long. It can be infectious to your team if you have poor performance and you're allowing it to stick around. It also helps you have that discipline for future, so like you're not bringing someone in, spending money on them, and then not being too nice where you're pivoting a poor performer and trying to fit them into a different role. Sometimes, yes, there are exceptions to this. I think it's not the norm, but doing that can probably cause you more problems, because then again, you're burning, spend on someone who probably doesn't fit the role that you hired them to do. You're now making up a artificial role for them that's a waste of time. They're spinning their wheels, and again, sends the wrong message to other people within your company.
That's super helpful. And just to follow up, doing something like a milestone-based bonus, where it's like if it's a really big moment for the company. I think you touched on it for a second, but just curious, it feels weird at an early stage, but you can be really creative at the earliest stages. So finding ways to make sure that like you as a company hit your deadlines when, fewer people, higher impact per person.
I think that's something that you could do at an early stage company, being creative around that to incentivize people to like deliver on a project. But you also want to be a little bit careful, right? Because then you might make that the expectation for them. So like every time you want a feature shipped, then now they expect like, oh, are we doing that bonus again? And so I think like really being selective on when you do it, having a conversation around it, communicating that like this is like the most important thing that we're going to do at this stage of the project. So for this one time, like it could be beneficial, but I think not making it something that people begin to expect.
I think that's the key point there. Is it's a hard thing to scale, and so if you do choose to do something like that, making sure you're very clear in communications, very deliberate about why we're doing this, who's affected, and not setting an expectation that this is going to happen every time we hit a milestone.
So in our scenario, we're actually looking at a number of people who haven't worked in startups before, and one of the things they're attracted to is equity, right? They like the idea of being able to actually own something, and it's a new and exciting thing, but they don't typically know how to think of it in the same way that founders and people who have been around startups forever do in terms of the complexity. So any advice on framing how they should value equity, and kind of not in a deceptive way, but being able to abstract some of the more complex technical elements of vesting schedules for people where it's the first time that they've seen that. And I think a lot of times too, they don't want to admit that it's the first time they'd seen that.
For most people, even if they've been in the startup world, equity is still pretty nebulous. So I think you as the founder, you owe it to them to explain how equity works. Everything from saying, this is how our program works. This is options, not RSUs, as an example, or it's RSUs, and kind of making sure there's a difference between those two. Explaining to many of them that there is a post-termination exercise window. If you were to leave, there's an X amount of time that you have to cut a check to me to buy the equity. When you tell that to people, they'll be like, what? I got to cut a check to buy the equity? And I didn't know. This is surprising, unfair. You should have told me about it. It's there in the program documents, but so that's a really important thing for you to explain. How does equity work? But I think your question also was saying, how do I show the value of this equity, right? So one of the things that I've done in the past is generally to look at your current run rate, your potential total addressable market, and then kind of plot outcomes at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10x if you think that you're going to get to that number. And being very clear that this is where I think we could go. But again, for token, I wouldn't want you to do this because you cannot and should not be predicting token price, and you have to go through legal, et cetera. But if it's just a general equity piece, you're like, I think we're going to be in a $1 billion company or $300 million company. You've come in at 50 million. You got a 6x upside. Add some dilution to it. You probably got a 4.5x upside because this is how I think I'm going to get to 300 million. For example, this is one of the things that I did in one of the other companies. I said, our current EBITDA is this. The market gives an average 17x EBITDA to all fintech companies, 27x to Adyen, 17x to Visa, 3x to someone else, and Coinbase is X. This is publicly traded numbers. And so therefore, assuming that we're going to get a 15x EBITDA to our 30 million EBITDA, we're worth $450 million. That is the way to say, as opposed to saying, oh, we're going to be worth $500 million. It means like nothing. But then if you say this is the addressable market, we've got $1 trillion of assets to tokenize. We think we're going to get 0.1% of that. That translates to this, and we're going to get we're going to get 10 bips of that tokenized market as our net revenue. Our burn rate is this. So I think we're going to be EBITDA positive, growing at 70%, and the market's going to value us at X multiple. And this is why I think we're going to be that. That is the way that I will trust you as a founder, because you talked not just about the value of my equity, you talked about the market, you talked about how the multiples that you think about. You also shared with me how the VCs that you're getting money from are thinking about this. You're also giving me a market perspective on my equity. And still, it might not be there, but at least you're giving me the right way to think about it. And you're getting up and saying, by the way, if you leave, you have 90 days. Don't come back to me and tell me that you didn't know. Right? Kind of make that as a funny thing, and then people would just walk through walls for you.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that too. Like, I think it's important that you own the narrative around this too, because as I'm sure you're already encountering, candidates will have all kinds of different resources. A friend who told them, well, because you're joining as the 10th engineer, you should get X% of the company or whatever else. And the reality is there's so many variables that influence what that number should actually be. And you're going to know the value of your equity better than anybody on the outside. And so again, knowing that story, but doing so in a way that is also realistic and managing expectations. A big pitfall in this area is promising, we're going to be $1 billion company in X amount of years, or a 10 billion or 100 billion, whatever it is. And then you have a culture of people who a year in, 2 years in, are upset that their equity isn't worth 10x what it was 2 years ago. And it was just a mismatched expectation from the beginning. And so I think committing, getting folks to commit to the long term, again, owning that narrative, owning the variables that you can, and anchoring your vision and kind of the way that you pitch that equity to those anchors, to those hard facts. Why are you valuing the equity the way that you are? What, again, the examples that Madan was just walking through, how it compares to other companies. This is the market we're going after. This is the leader in the market today. This is their market cap. We're here today. This is why we think we're valued. And again, just owning that whole vision and narrative is really, really important. And the other thing I would say is encourage, questions, like encourage the candidate to challenge you on these things. Again, you want to make sure that there's not a mismatch in terms of expectations, when liquidity is going to happen, what's a realistic outcome from this, because that can lead to very unhappy employees. That leads to a lot of churn within the organization pretty quickly.
And then real quick, one of our portfolio companies, Forecaster, actually does this really well on their careers page. If you want to check it out, they have this whole document on how to explain their options and equity and scenarios and all that. Dan Romero and Varun wrote it, and I thought it's pretty incredible.
I've got some questions around like the levels and kind of clear job role design that you mentioned. Sounds like a really valuable framework, but kind of questions around, one, how do you define exactly what you need for a role that's a little bit more ambiguous? So like for us, like hiring engineers has been really straightforward and easy because we know exactly like what we need out of them. But for non-engineering roles, it's a little bit harder to define and like imagine 12 months in the future what that's going to look like, and like hiring somebody who can grow into like what your needs might be 12 months in the future. And then as kind of like a follow-up to that as well, when do you break those leveling requirements? So for example, like if you think you've defined something and then you come across a candidate who's like a higher level and like really, really strong, but also way more expensive than you thought you wanted to pay for that role? Like, how do you balance kind of just like surrounding yourself with the best people possible versus like sticking with your levels that you set?
I think for the way you want to think about levels, you want to really go back to saying, the outcomes that you want from this role. And I use time span of discretion. You could use MOC or just a clear definition. What outcomes you want will generally be a good starting point for your levels. Then I would then look at Pave. You got the leveling infrastructure. They've got P1 to P6 or P7, very clearly defined what is the difference between a P3, a P4, and a P5, meaning difference between levels. But then you forget about all of that and then look at, okay, I'm running this business. What kind of people do I need to kind of to bring my mission to life? If you ask that fundamental question, you're going to generally kind of see people in about 3 buckets, right? You're going to see folks exceptionally strong competencies, early stage developing. You're going to see folks with experience, with really good competencies, and can take on leadership roles and take a big chunk of your give you bandwidth back. Then you're going to see true execs who can be industry-defining leaders, who can make game-changing moves for you on any of the functions that they're leading. Forget about the levels for a second. Just be first principle focused. You're like, okay, this is generally a good way to think about it. There are probably about 3 mega levels. And then each of those levels have about 2 sub-levels. So you could say a SWE and a senior SWE are the sub-level for a software engineer to really get to being a staff. Staff probably has 2 levels, that's staff and senior staff. You might say that might not be relevant for me. You might say just be 1 staff engineer. And then by the time you have about 5, 6, 7 years of staff engineering experience under your belt, you're ready to be a principal engineer, which is a really, really high level, right? To get to being a principal engineer at Amazon, I know that people, it was like their dream. You got to being a PE, you were God, meaning you wouldn't get to being PE unless you were just exceptional. Then okay, at the end of PE, is your distinguished engineer and your fellow. And then look back and then take what Google did when they were 50 employees. They did pretty much somewhat the same. They said, we've got fellows and distinguished engineers, we've got principals, we've got staff, and we've got SWEs. That became, they got their leveling infrastructure done, not by going to a database and saying, here are 8 levels, let me kind of map people. They just thought through first principles and said, I'm meeting these exceptional people at Stanford who are distinguished engineers and fellows. I'm meeting very strong principals. I'm meeting highly accomplished SWEs, I'm going to call them staff, and then I'm going to meet outstanding young people from universities and their SWEs. That became their leveling infrastructure. So think about what is it for you from a first principle standpoint. Then you will generally come down to this you will come to this intersection of early, mid, and true leadership levels, and then you can kind of subdivide the level. I think the second question is a hard one, and it's a great question, by the way. Do you break the band? Do you break the level? You found someone exceptional. I think it directly correlates to what your growth rate is. If you're growing, you got many problems to solve. You might say that I'm going to bring someone else. I looked for a senior SWE, but I ended up with a senior staff. But as far as this person is hands-on, can do both the senior SWE job and all the other things that I've gotten to do, that's great. But if you are not growing, you're still like only 15, 20 people, and you overhired someone, then that person might not be happy. And saying, hey, this job is, I don't have much to do. But just also remember the other end of the spectrum that work fills the space available, right? So you will people will find more work to do that could be distracting as well. Just be aware of that. But if you're in hyper-growth mode, then that's an easier question for you to solve than if you're not.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's obviously you don't want to let a great piece of talent walk by if you have a chance they're interested in whatever else, but you do have to think through the retention piece as well. Just because you can get them to say yes and join the company, are they going to be impactful? Are they going to enjoy the role? Are they going to be challenged? Are they going to be here for 2 or 3 years or beyond, ideally, and not just coming in and realizing that this isn't as fun as my last job was, even though I believed in the company and the founder and the vision. The other note that I would make on leveling infrastructure too is I would say at an earlier stage, also don't overcomplicate it or overthink it. Likely your leveling will evolve as the company does. And as you go from 10 people to 100 people to 1,000 people, you'll likely need, more levels at each of these different stages just as your org becomes more and more complex. And again, it's trying to straddle the line of being really well thought out, like what is the organization looking like today, but also avoiding a spot where you've got 20 employees and 15 levels. Like that doesn't make sense either. So trying to be, realistic with what those should look like as your company scales.
And real quick, I would lean more towards conservative and disciplined on down leveling or having a lower title versus the other direction, because you can calibrate later and it's much easier and better for people if you end up promoting them into that versus having to go backwards. So just trying to stick to conservative and discipline will go a long way, because you can't bring someone down. So might as well fire them.
I have two questions which are related. The first one is, is there any ideal or optimal vesting schedule for tokens, on-chain tokens? And then the second question is, what are your thoughts on non-linear vesting schedules where you're giving away more tokens the longer someone is staying with the company? For example, they're getting double the amount of tokens if they're staying for 3 years compared to 2 years.
What we're seeing is generally tokens have a cliff, which is a 1-year cliff, and then they vest over 4 years, because you want to tie people's behavior to long-term outcomes. I think that's what the point Craig was making. We're also seeing companies give annual tokens versus 4-year tokens, saying that this is the model that Stripe followed. This is really interesting, right? When Stripe was at $3.5 billion, they were doubling every 18 months. They figured that if they gave someone X amount of equity at $3.5 billion, they would end up being at $30 billion in less than 3 years or 4 years. That's a 10x upside. So Stripe went back to this model of saying, every year we're going to give you equity, not annual, not a 4-year grant. So many companies from a token standpoint too are like, given how volatile this is, I'm going to give an annual token grant versus a 4-year grant. That's the decision that you need to make. If you're early stage, you might be more like, I'm going to give a 4-year grant because that is the amount of time that it is going to take for this to settle down and truly be of value to the community. And therefore, I need to incent people's behavior for that, right? So that's, then you could also do a combination of saying, should this be linear? Should it be like vesting 25% at the end of 1 year and then 25% for the remainder of 3 years? Or should this be backloaded? The logic is the back half of your performance is really important for us. The first year and a half or two, you're not adding that much value as much as you would add in year 3 and year 4. So really thinking through saying, does that drive the outcomes that you want? So as opposed to, I think Mehdi made a great point early on, and we have seen this in real life. People come in, the token price goes up 10x, they made their financial outcomes, they're just doing barely enough not to get fired. So you've got now people who made crazy amounts of money, the others coming in, looking at them, not performing, and they're like, and you're still like, I got to hold on to this person, they're just about okay. Those are really bad set of things, the outcomes that you want to avoid. So I would really think through, if your token is very, very volatile, saying, do I give a 4-year grant versus an annual grant? How much of your token should be a part of your total compensation? And should this be backloaded or not? Go to your front of your employees and say, I'm going to backload your tokens. Half of them will raise their hand and say, I'm leaving right now. Right? They won't, but they will fight you on that. That's natural. But if you are like, no, I'm here for the long term, we have such a great roadmap ahead of us. The market is in the trillions of dollars. It doesn't matter what you're doing in the blockchain space. It is so massive. I want you to be for the long, here for the long ride. And that is the culture that I want to promote. Then it really changes everything the way you build your company.
Just a quick question about like how often should you be having compensation discussions with employees in this early stage? So, even framed as like pre-revenue, haven't hit a couple of those like key milestones yet. Like I think it's easy to entertain these conversations, but sometimes I wonder if it's too quick, too soon, too often.
I like to go back to versus saying have it twice a year, 4 times a year. Go be market-led. If your jobs are changing pretty dramatically and the market has moved, for smart contract engineers are up 30%, right? Because there are like 50 new companies that got funded in this space, and they're going after your talent. You want to be reviewing that number with your HR person or someone who's helping you out, or just call me and saying, hey, Madan, what's happened to this? Has this moved? Mehdi or I or Craig will be able to kind of give you a North Star of what's going on. So I would start with the market first rather than, oh, we should just follow this model. And then 2, it's natural that people want some kind of feedback every 6 months, right? Whether you do it formally, informally, et cetera. And most people associate feedback with performance reviews. You want to kind of break those two into 2 separate buckets. So if you get up to the company and say, and write it on your wiki, you say, we're going to review compensation at least once a year and more than once a year if the market moves. And if the market has moved dramatically, I want you to come and tell me about it so I can review it. I might not know that, but you are going to know that because your friends are. That would be so welcoming, right? I would be like, oh, I see you actually is open about talking about it. That's how I would think about it.
Yeah, and I would try to avoid doing it too frequently too, right? Because as you're smiling, I can see you already know how this goes, which is, it leads to employees asking about this far more often than they should, right? And so I think where you can establish a guideline of, yes, we do this at least once a year or every 6 months or something at a company level versus an individual conversation every time we have a one-on-one of when's my next raise or when am I going to get a refresher. I think trusting that the company and the organization is looking at this. Of course, we want to hear from our employees, but I think once or twice a year is probably the most you'd want to be having individual conversations around somebody's compensation.
Thank you for sharing some very thought-provoking questions. Those are truly great for us to be, I think, pondering about things as we're hiring or thinking about hiring and scaling. One of the things I think you put emphasis on was culture and a mission and the importance of being intentional on that, on creating and living. So we used Claire Hughes Johnson's Scaling People book to create a founding document, which, and now we have this beautiful document that we created. And our question now is, now what, right? I mean, we can use the document as we're hiring people for them to read as they're being interviewed or maybe during the onboarding. But what we're wondering is, how do we not keep that as just a document in the drive or in a drawer, but instead get it lived every day now that we have a small team, but also as it grows?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you could share some of the best practices you've seen around that.
Happy to. By the way, what Cleveland is referencing is Claire Johnson's book. Claire Johnson was the CEO for Stripe, I think, for 7 years. Outstanding book. There's a bunch of podcasts that she's done, which I would strongly encourage you to see. So she supported these two founders who were known to be brilliant, phenomenal, all great stuff, hard to work with, meaning not hard to work with, but extremely high bar. The Collison brothers, Patrick, and I forget the other brother's name, but they built a great company, right? They almost built a $100 billion company. All of us should say, Stripe, great job done. Claire was instrumental in she was the Sheryl Sandberg of Stripe, pretty much. So one of the, it's a great book, by the way, and one of the ways I kind of like to do this is to really go back to what I learned on how Amazon scaled from nothing to 600,000 employees today, and they still have the culture that is as fresh as it was 14 years ago. They basically built, as a best practice, a currency for talking about talent, right? So once the book, et cetera, eventually they basically said, every person we're going to discuss, whether it being the way we hire someone, the way we fire someone, the way we promote someone, is going to be based off these 14 leadership principles that's there on their blog or their website. It was 10, now it's 14. So at Amazon, I spent quite a lot of time there, you can't have a conversation about anything without referencing these 14. That becomes the core currency for your talent conversation. So that's one way to think about it, to say, now in my regular conversations, in the way I make a hiring decision, a debrief decision, a promotion decision, and a firing decision, do I reference the book that your culture document, and does that now start to have its own legs? Otherwise, as you said, it's a document that looks good, now what? It now starts to become a way in which you have conversations in the company. The second one is, how do you recognize people? Do you say, Joe, great job done? Or do you say that this aspect of our culture, Joe really exemplified this? And so then it goes down to, how often do you communicate to employees? Do you do it randomly once in a month, or do you have a structured way of saying, we're going to run weekly or bi-weekly an employee all hands, we're going to talk about this, this is how we're going to program that all hands and bring this to life. But that's another way of doing it. And there are many other ways. The other thing is, how do you recognize and promote people? Do you just say, oh, Sarah got promoted, congrats? Or Sarah got promoted for exemplifying this value, which is so close to us. Once you start opening your eyes and like saying, oh my God, we could bring up this document in every aspect of our business, including a client call, including a VC discussion, including the deck that you're making, including your careers webpage, then it starts to have a real life and meaning. And this simply stop encouraging people who do not use these set of words. You say, which aspect of the culture are you talking about? Oh, I can't work with Joe. Now, what about this that you can't work with Joe? Explain to me in this from a culture standpoint. then everybody will be forced to do that. So that's how I've seen companies do it.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back, I think maybe 12:05, 10 minutes, Anna, yeah. So yeah, we'll be back in this room at 12:05. We're going to, again, go through a quick exercise working towards that blog post that we were talking about at the beginning of the day. So see you guys in about 10 minutes. Thank you. We're going to start now our talent brand and careers page workshop. We're going to get through this pretty quickly. I think we went a little long in the last section, so we'll speed through this a bit. And ultimately, again, there is, I guess, a deliverable that we're asking for by Wednesday of next week, which is, again, we're going to be posting this blog post once CSX wraps up in a couple of weeks, highlighting all of the companies in this room, linking out to any open roles and job descriptions that you might have. As part of that, we're hoping to have like a 3 to 5 sentence blurb, just a quick summary of what the company does. Really a hook that would get folks to, one, make you stand out on the list, and two, entice folks to learn more about your organization, what you guys are doing. So again, we realize a lot of you already have a version of this as well. That's awesome. We're here to provide any critiques or feedback or answer any questions you might have on this as well. Again, there's a ton that goes into a careers page. We're just going to be focusing on kind of that quick hook and intro for today's session. So we're going to start by just defining, what is your talent brand and how should you think about this? Again, this quick intro, the summary, this first pitch, it's the quick blurb that people are reading when they're hearing about your company for the first time. You should think of this as, most people think of pitches as revealing information, but really in reality, it's answering questions. It's trying to understand, what is my audience? What do they not know about me today? What do they need to learn in order to be, again, interested to just start clicking a little bit further, reading more information about your organization? So think of this little blurb as an elevator pitch, a clear, crisp, concise way of answering the question of, what do you guys do and why should I be excited about it if you're reading through the lens of a candidate? It's going to set the foundation for everything that you do externally when it comes to addressing a candidate market, and ultimately is going to be way more effective than a LinkedIn message or any email or DM that you could send to somebody. This content's going to be working for you while you're not speaking to people. It's just kind of there and living forever. And at this early stage where there's not a lot of publicity, there's not a lot of public traction for your companies today, this really can be a key differentiator when people are coming across your company for the first time, knowing that, again, most of your audience isn't going to know who you are or what you guys are about. So that quick pitch and hook is going to be really important from the get-go. I'm going to pass it to Mehdi now, who's going to talk, I guess, in terms of different types of content around this and then effective ways of sharing this once you have the content produced.
Thank you, Craig. So the goal today in the 15 minutes we're going to have you do the workshop is getting that blurb put together. That's like the basic thing that we need to put in the blog post that we're going to do in the week of demo day. But there's homework for you beyond that, right? Because you're going to have that blurb. That's awesome. But you ideally want a link or a landing page that then brings them to, like, what is the career page or the jobs that you're trying to fill. And so I want to talk a little bit about the content that you should put on that page. And it can be in the form of a Notion doc or an actual web page that you can create. I know time is going to be limited, so whatever's convenient that you can get out there for someone to go to will be important. And we're going to follow up with an email that you guys will receive shortly after this that gives you examples of early stage companies in our portfolio and later stage companies, just to give you some things to think about. But it's a wide variety of things. It could be the mission, the values, benefits, the backgrounds of the founders, backstory of your project, any media links that you maybe already have, YouTube videos that you've published, talks at conferences, any PR that you've done, announcement of your company or funding that you've received, whatever it is that you think will get someone excited about your project to want to click further to apply to your actual role. And you could also repurpose this for sales or whatever. But yeah, something to take away from the email today that you're going to receive and put something together beyond that blurb that you'll work on in the next 10, 15 minutes. And then what to do with this beyond that, right? I think one of the key things that people don't realize is creating some sort of resource that you can have work for you. So being able to share this across your networks, at the least getting this out on Twitter, LinkedIn, Discord channels you're a part of, alumni groups from your university, using your current team members to come and share this with you, former colleagues, classmates, friends, family, whatever it is. Pro tip, try to package this up into like a nice email or something that's really easy for them to just take and forward on. So preparing all that over the next couple of weeks that you can then use to get your branding and your careers page and jobs out there.
Yeah, and I think the same goes for early stage employees as well. And ultimately, you guys as founders, part of your job is to be a recruiter as well, and that really extends to the entire founding team. And so once you do come up with this talent brand and you start creating content materials around this, also make sure that you're equipping the folks on your team to tell a similar story and a consistent vision with what you're describing as the founder.
A few examples we want to give you before you write your blurb. Want to jump into those. The first one is Farcaster. I'll read this real quick just so you can all see it. Farcaster is an open social network built for the crypto community. Users can create profiles, post messages, talk to each other just like Twitter. Over 300,000 people have signed up for Farcaster. Also has some unique features, channels, frames, clients. There is no single company or server that controls Farcaster. Anyone can run a node, which lets them download the entire network and post new messages. It's a unique architecture that gives developers the freedom to build all kinds of apps for users. Learn more by watching a video that they link there or reading the docs. I think a couple call outs for this one. If you see at the top, it's an engaging description of what it is they're actually building, really clear and concise. Then they go into the features that I think they can call out as something that they've built that hopefully would be something exciting from a technical product standpoint. And then at the bottom, what makes them different, what's unique about their actual product, and comparing it to what the current system is right now with like Twitter. As you can see, this is like a very product driven approach to like how they're trying to sell in their blurbs. So that's one aspect. Another one is dynamic, talking about the mission and then the passion behind why these founders built it. If you read it, their backstory is how they met, what it is they're actually building and why they're building it, and the reason behind it. And if you ever get to meet those founders, you'll see why they chose that approach. They're just amazing, contagious personalities that I think, if you saw, this is why you'd want to come and work for their company in addition to what they're actually building. But yeah, that's two examples. One is like a product, technical focus. Other one would be more about the mission, passion behind the project. Whatever it is you decide to do, I think the key thing is to be genuine and authentic so that it really shows like who you are and why someone would want to click further to apply and meet you or work for your project.
Generally, again, the main theme that we're trying to get to is this is obviously not your entire careers page or your entire talent brand, but somewhat, again, being deliverable focused here, trying to use this information for our blog post in a couple of weeks. So we were then going to break up and I guess end the session now and have you guys work individually, spend the next 15, 20 minutes or so. Again, we realize a lot of you guys already have some version of this created. We're happy to just give feedback or help you add on to that. Or if there's anything else you guys want to talk through on talent brand, Madan, Mehdi, and myself will just be walking around the room. So we're going to ask that you guys send this back to us 7 days from now. So by Wednesday of next week, give us time to do any editing before we go live with the blog post.
Yep, and just one last thing. This is like opt-in, so we assume if you send this to us by next week, then we'll include you in that blog post. But highly encourage all of you to take advantage of this. Like probably the easiest way to get your branding out there using A16Z crypto channels. We can reshare this, all that. So I think just highly encourage you, put the work in and send this over to us. It'll go a long way in getting people attracted to your webpage.
Yep.
Thank you.